Joining me on the program, CEO Jonathan Ayling. Jonathan, kia ora. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Always a pleasure.
Now, I suppose the latest victory, some good news from unlikely places like universities in recent months, but the latest one, it seems that the police have stepped down from their flagging of supposed hate crime. Some good conversations in that space.
That's absolutely right, and I think our team is really heartened, Andrew. None of this comes easy. We've got a real cultural conversation on our hands in terms of how we value the right to think freely and speak for ourselves. I would say though that we're good people engage in good faith. Good things can happen, and as you say, in universities we have an ongoing constructive conversation with universities and new legislation coming in to strengthen speech rights there. That's currently before Parliament, and with police. A major issue that we've discussed a number of times that I think stands to be one of the most significant things we've ever pressed back on, which was training to recognize, record, and respond to hate speech and hate crime.
Yeah.
Even though New Zealand doesn't have hate crime, and police were recording non-criminal hate incidences that were, they admit, based purely on the subjectivity of the victim, a bystander, the police, or any other third party claiming it was motivated by hate. I mean, this was unworkable stuff, and so we were able to put real pressure on police, and they have backed down from those non-criminal hate incidences. They've changed this training entirely, and when we most recently met with them, we said, okay, thousands of Kiwis were flagged with hate based on a purely subjective level during the number of months that this was in place, over a year. And what's going to happen with those? This is still on their record, and they told us it's just not possible for us to go back and remove this. And we said nonsense, and it's a really major issue that you've backed down on this definition. You say this isn't actually a workable framework, and yet you're still telling police officers in the future that looking at this record that these are hateful people. This has to be addressed, and thankfully police have somehow managed to come up with a way quite promptly to go through and just remove the flags, which is exactly what we think was necessary. And so we're very pleased that no longer will this subjective and unworkable definition be held against people on the basis of thought or action, but certainly not crime that they committed.
It's certainly great news there, but then they came for our architects, and this would be, people saying, well, free speech and how we design buildings. How is this even a thing? What's the deal with this one, Jonathan?
Yeah, the Free Speech Union has recently come across new requirements that the New Zealand's Registered Architects Board has put in place. And so there are dozens of professions in New Zealand that are regulated by regulatory bodies. And the core function of these bodies is to ensure that the public can have confidence that when someone rocks up and says, I'm an architect, I can design your house for you, their only experience isn't doodling in their mum's basement. And there's a really legitimate interest in that across a host of professions, whether it's teachers, whether it's doctors, lawyers, architects, etc. You certainly don't want your gas fitter not knowing how to make sure it's safe in your house. This is absolutely relevant. However, what we've seen is this ongoing capture of institutions that is occurring, and through that, an enormous expansion of scope that ends up really implicating people's right to think differently in our society than some regulatory overlords, and still get to practice as a gas fitter, or in this case as architects. So, and there's a real problem there, Andrew, because free speech isn't just the right to speak. Free speech is a really important, legally and philosophically, it is a really important precept that guarantees the right for you to say stuff if you want to, but you don't have to say things if you don't want to. That's also part of it. That's compelled speech. You get to listen to other people. You get to hear other people's opinions. Others can't tell you you don't get to listen to what other people say, but you don't have to listen to people either. And the whole notion of free speech, that words aren't violence, that people should be able to say offensive things even if you are offended by them, only works if we also say, but you don't have to listen to them. No one has a right to say offensive things and a right to demand you listen to them. Now, of course, within the context of a regulated profession, that's slightly different, where we want our doctors to have core competencies. We want our architects to have core competencies. The function there, the emphasis there being core competencies and requirements, for example, that architects will now be able to demonstrate understandings of the principles of project planning, considering implications for te ao Māori. That's not core competency. Being able to integrate and qualify performance standards on the base consideration of te ao Māori. This is ideological imposition. And we've seen it in many other cases as well. The Real Estate Agents Authority also requiring real estate agents to go in and learn about Māori gods and that kind of thing.
Yep.
This is absolute scope creep, and it implicates their speech rights. If an employer wants to do it, that's a different thing. These boards should not be doing it.
Can I just jump in, because it's not just the words, it's the optics on this one. Some people would say, hey, you're just pushing back on this because it's Te Ao Māori. And actually, is there a place for saying, you know what, particularly if we have architects who are qualified overseas, who are coming to New Zealand, and for them professionally, for them to have an understanding about aspects of our culture which are unique to New Zealand, wouldn't that be useful for them in a professional setting? Maybe, I suppose, pushing back on it just because it's Māori or involves Te Tiriti can be a bit of a bad look, honestly.
Oh, look, kind of two features there. I want to come back to your use of the word useful, but to your core point, you're absolutely right. It is awkward at the moment to try and push back on this because of the implications that come with that. And we're willing to wear that and go consistently when we stand up for people's right to speak. That is not the same as standing up or standing beside these people. It is standing for their right to speak. And not that you're making this argument, Andrew, but our opponents who make this argument that, well, clearly we're just far-right, bigoted individuals who only want to stand up with hate speech. This is a fallacy. It's a terrible argument in terms of the implications then that free speech almost relies on it being offensive at some point. No one's going to reject a speech that isn't offensive or isn't provocative at some level. This is why this radical idea that people get to speak or not speak or listen or not listen, regardless of what other people think, is so important. It's so foundational, not just to democracy, but to really the way we do life in New Zealand. I think many people don't sit back and reflect on the implications of being able to think for ourselves and speak for ourselves, which has not been freedoms many people have had around the world, across history, even today. I want to come back to your use of the word useful, though, and you're absolutely right. You know, for example, Ngā Tahu is a big builder, big economic force in the South Island. Surely an architect's firm in the South Island should look at this from a commercial perspective and say, real value in understanding Te Ao Māori, real value in speaking te reo in these contexts. We want our people to be able to do this. That is absolutely their right. Absolutely, it's useful. So kind of 2 points there. One, if it's so useful, do we not trust professionals to cotton onto that themselves and go, well, if it's useful, why are you forcing people to do it? Why? So the question of compulsion is a big feature there. The other point I really want to make is the difference between a regulatory body making this required and an employer making this required. Now, if I go out and I set up an architect's firm and I employ someone, they voluntarily exchange services and goods in exchange for payment. And that is part of the contractual arrangement, their choice to engage in. The core word being choice. If I want to require them to study Te Ao Māori, they have the choice to go and work at another architect's firm. If the architect's board requires this and they don't want to, they have no choice to go to a different architect's board. They have no choice. They either give up on the training that they've done at universities and the years they've spent in the profession simply because they think differently or don't want to hear certain opinions, or they compromise and they self-censor or they give up on their speech rights. And I don't think that's a choice we should be forcing people to make. It doesn't end well, actually. I think a really core point that anyone who disagrees with us up until this point should keep in mind, that what this often does more than anything is breeds real resentment. You know, some of your listeners may be able to relate to religious training in schools. I think, you know, things like Bible in schools, for example, great initiative. But when individuals are forced to sit there and you sit there and you quietly and you hear these opinions, more often than not, it actually breeds resentment and opposition and antagonism towards these ideas, rather than when you invite people into these conversations. And I think there's an enormous space with Bible in schools and with Te Ao Māori to invite people into these conversations. But voluntary association is what defines free societies. And to end just on a theological point, if your listeners are familiar with the neo-Calvinist theologian and former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Abraham Kuyper, he talks about the concept of sphere sovereignty. Sphere sovereignty is really important here, and it says we don't impose from one sphere into another. And I think that's exactly what's happening here, and it's not going to end well.
Yeah, well, hey, appreciate your insight on this one, and an important area for people to be able to make choices in this space. I, for one, resented definitely the compulsory study of mathematics in my high school years, but it hasn't done me any harm, honestly, Jonathan. Thank you for what you do at Free Speech Union, of course, fsu.nz. For more information, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.